This is a 2v3. I just heard a respawn ship over here. My teammate is a little bit behind me, and I'm taking that into account as I'm pushing up. I thought I only saw one player drop from the ship, and it looks like this lifeline. She was caught slacking here a bit. She's on white armor. Push up. She elects to re-challenge, which was silly. I immediately use some cover and start to heal. But then I get an audio cue that they're pushing up. Then there's also a conduit ultimate. It's a little bit of chaos. So I smoke. I back up. I don't like that conduit ult. There's too much to shoot and not enough space for me to deal with it. So my teammate ended up pushing up. He gets downed. He downs the conduit, luckily though. And then Horizon queues up and I crack her. So I destroyed this little section of it and then I go for the res. She's playing way back and I can hear that she has a 30-30. So she's looking for more of a long range engagement and I'm looking for more of a close range. I get the res off. I'm expecting a Horizon ult. Here it comes. One clip it. At this time, I'm just waiting for my teammate to reset, putting some pressure down. I smoke her. He throws a pad and then this is just an awesome clip here. Smoke really screws her up, as you can imagine why. She can't see very well. She doesn't understand exactly how many players are coming at her or where they're exactly at. And then I just use that to my advantage because I remember exactly where she is at and I get a decent spray in the air at her. I think this fight is a great example of the subtleties of dancing in and out of a fight. Getting some damage, backing up, adjusting to what's happening to me in live time, a conduit ult, my teammate pushing up. Luckily, he takes one down, right? But this team was pushing up pretty aggressively after I downed the lifeline, and I didn't really like what was happening. So I back out, come back in, and then we handle business. But it really comes down to teamwork, ability usage, and just understanding when to strike. I didn't get antsy and try to push out of my cover while the Horizon's ADS gave me the 30-30. I played patient, used the res, which is my leverage here, tried to thirst her teammate, see if that would make her come off high ground. She elected to stay, so I just smoked it, teammate padded, and boom, GG's. All right, moving on later in this game, there is a team at Promenade who is shooting us, but quickly they start getting third party. So I used my Bangalore ult here because I thought they might push out onto that platform. As you can see, that Revenant is running low ground here. My Bangalore ult ended up doing nothing here. It wasn't the best use of an ability, but that's kind of hindsight because I wasn't sure exactly where everyone was at. We try to take the zip. I obviously get fried, so I drop down. Go an arc in case they want to chase. Pop my bat. My teammate's holding for me. Then I'm going to pop a med kit. We're just going to back up. We thought about going up around, hitting up the other side. We can hear the audio above us, but it sounds like they're just kind of mirroring us. They think we're going that way. So it's not looking too good. You never want to be stuck low ground. As we turn this corner, we see two people ratting here. Not sure why or what they're thinking, but we kill them pretty quickly. And now we're ready because the other team is thinking we're fighting, so they're going to drop. Crack the Mirage, and then we get shot at from the left, so that's where I smoke. I get a 64 spray, which is pretty good, but I knew my teammate was in rough shape, so I'm trying to buy some time here. My arc bounces off his back. There's a bunch of frags coming in from both sides. I'm able to 1v1 the Maggie, and then the guy peeks through the smoke. My teammate takes care of that Octane, and now it's just last one, and we call that out to each other. So my teammate medkits, and then I don't really shield here. I don't have bats, so I'm just kind of being aggressive. I know my teammate's right there for backup, and I trust him. If I was solo queuing, I definitely would have healed because, yeah, you know how randoms can be. But when you're playing with teammates you trust, you can do things together like this. Smoking here was clutch, you know, at the beginning of the fight where we got beamed off the zip line. That would create an element of surprise if these players wanted to drop and chase us. You know, it may cause some confusion as well. But then as the fight progresses, that duo and the third party tries to approach, smoking off that Octane was huge because it allowed for the Maggie to push me while I couldn't get shot by the Octane. Of course, I did get some damage off, so the Octane may have just elected to heal, maybe not. And then the Mirage was playing a little too far back in order to get involved in this fight. He did try throwing some frag grenades, but ultimately smoking off that player so they're not able to abuse their off angle and get involved in the fight, even when they're not necessarily close, is what Bangalore is so freaking good at. I mean, of course, her smokes are very multifaceted. They can come in handy in so many different scenarios, and that's a huge reason why she's so meta still. These are 6 bad Apex habits keeping you down. Let's get into it. Number 1, not using your abilities enough. Look, you have to be in touch with what your legend does and is capable of in all kinds of different situations. Now, this may sound rather straightforward, but theory is one thing, and putting it into practice is a whole other beast. There's 24 legends right now, all with at least 3 abilities, and that doesn't even include their legend upgrades now. This can be a lot to manage for players who are not super experienced, especially if they don't main one legend. Chances are, though, if you do only play one legend and you have a lot of time time on that one, then you're probably pretty good with your ability usage. But if that's not you, or if you venture off to playing another legend, you gotta learn to become more mindful about when and where to use those abilities. The longer Apex has been out, the more abilities have crept into affecting how fights turn out. This is something that will only continue to progress with more legends being added and more abilities being stronger. It's only natural for them to play a significant role in fights. The best advice that I can give here that will apply to any legend you're playing is first focus on the legend's class and use that to determine the type of role you're fulfilling for your squad. And then be sure to utilize specific strategies for that class to better place you in positions to strengthen your abilities. If you're playing a support legend, for example, you're going to need to anchor for your team, meaning play behind them and be acutely aware of when they take any damage or go down. You're still going to need to focus on playing your life and shooting your gun. You have to balance that with what your role is here. If you play a more aggressive legend like a skirmisher, you need to focus on using your mobility to get entry damage in the fight and then learn to close the gap, take a high ground angle, or possibly retreat depending on how the fight is playing out. There are so many different kinds of scenarios, but one of the most simple things in Apex is just timing your abilities and using them correctly. If you screw this up, it really becomes harder and harder to win against more experienced players because obviously they are using their abilities better than you are. And an underrated aspect to this is it really affects how your whole team plays too. One legend on the team plays a significant role in how that fight may turn out depending on what role they're fulfilling. So keep in mind, certain abilities don't just benefit you, they benefit your team too, and that's another factor you want to take into consideration while trying to improve. And if you are the type of player that enjoys playing one legend, then really try to focus on everything that legend is good at and avoid the things that they aren't. You really want to learn them inside and out and be really honed in to what their abilities do. For me, I have a lot of experience with Caustic, and certain fights I will always avoid are just getting him out in the open in transition. That is not something that he's strong at. He needs to play in a building or in some close quarters where he has some cover and some areas that he can control with his gas and his traps. Other legends do not want to find themselves in the same scenarios that Caustic likes to thrive in, and that's really what this is all about, leaning into what your legend does well and trying to avoid the scenarios that your legend is very weak in. Number 2, not taking advantage of damage in your team's favor. Look, this is something that players struggle with at all skill levels, and the degree in which will vary depending on where you're at in the skill ladder. But most importantly, if you just deal more damage than you take, then you need to move off of it, and I'm speaking broadly here. You need to get closer to that enemy and try to capitalize on the edge you have. Now, of course, if you're in an endgame scenario and one team is going to punish you from high ground as you push the other team that you just dealt the damage to, then you obviously don't want to risk that, and you're going to have to use your discretion in certain moments. But broadly speaking, if you're dealing more damage than you're taking, then you need to figure out a way to close the gap, because this all boils down to time. Okay, it's going to take the enemy player time to pop a shield battery, 5 seconds to be exact, and that's if they get to the spot that they think they can heal in, and then they pop the heal. If they don't have a battery, that time then extends to a much longer duration while they slowly heal up their shield. The point here is that if you can get to them before they start that process, then you're taking advantage of the advantage that you have over them. Now, I'm making this sound really simple and basic, but it's not always going to be like that because Apex is a 3-on-3 game and there's 20 other teams in the lobby. So a lot can happen and a lot can go wrong even when you think you have an advantage up front. One of the things that a lot of players struggle with, particularly as they're climbing the skill ladder, is they deal some damage, but they don't actually take any aggressive means to get to that enemy that they just did that to. So they kind of squander an opportunity and then they may never get an opportunity like that again. Good players will know if that an enemy player didn't make them pay for whatever advantage they had over them previously, that then gives that enemy player confidence because they know, okay, that player didn't take care of me when they had me beat. Now I feel like they're a weak player, and then that could just factor into the player being super confident and just wind up beating you when they get a different opportunity. Every player at one time or another will struggle with this, and it's something that's very common, but it just boils down to understanding the variables. What armor the enemy is on, what armor you're on, how much time will it take for you to get to that enemy, is there another team that can make you pay for pushing, or is there another enemy player on that team that has a good angle that will shoot you as you cross to that player that you had low? Whatever the factors are, you need to evaluate them and be aware of them as best as you can, but you and your team need to learn to move off of that quickly and efficiently, because if you don't, this is a really bad habit to have in Apex. In the majority of scenarios, Apex has a long time to kill. This is not Call of Duty or another first-person shooter that, you can just one-shot somebody. An Apex fight can be grueling, it can be rather lengthy, and there are a lot of variables at play that most players just aren't accustomed to unless they've played another FPS with a fairly lengthy time to kill. Next is number 3, which is panicking. panicking. Now, this is more of a mental thing, but it will manifest in many different ways in your games if you end up panicking in a certain moment. It's really common and it screws up a lot of players, and it just makes them do not the right thing, essentially. And it's tough to narrow down to one specific thing to look out for, but you have to learn to use your experience as an asset. And in Apex, you have to get accustomed to these high stress scenarios, especially if you're trying to grind ranked, or if you're just getting into any competitive setting where there's a lot going on in a small amount of space in a short amount of time. A simple tip is to just focus on your breathing, try to keep your cool, remain confident, but also cautious. And I think if you can do that, then you have a pretty good groundwork to beating a lot of players in this game. But when players get too cocky, they screw up. When players get too scared, they play on their heels and they also screw up. And there's going to be a fine line and a fine balance that you're going to want to try to maintain throughout your games. And you can't just get experience through osmosis. You have to be in those places and in those situations and recognize that, all right, even if I lost here, I have to turn this into an asset, or figure out why you won in a different scenario. And you have to take all of that experience with you and realize that every situation that you get into in Apex, hopefully you've been in a similar one or in the exact same scenario before, so that you feel really confident with your decisions and you know what to do in them. Now, this is going to be true in so many different things in life, and it also just applies to Apex and your experience within the game. If you fail to take into account the experiences you've had and learning from them, then I don't really believe you're setting yourself up for success. Going through all of this will build a level of resilience in you, and I think this is really important to have as you try to get better and better in Apex. Number 4. Now, speaking of panicking, one thing that players do, whether they panic, whether they just don't think and turn their brain off, or they're just not used to these things, the next bad habit is swinging wide or ignoring your nearby cover altogether. Remember, cover comes in all different shapes and sizes, and depending on what your angle is versus your opponent's angle, there may be a lot of different cover to utilize at your disposal. It's important to note when to be using cover and when you can sort of move away from it because you have that advantage. Obviously, if you start behind cover, engage with your enemy, you have the best chance of success. If you're starting out in the open and your enemy is starting behind cover, well, you really don't have a good chance to win that fight. Swinging wide out of your cover or just ignoring your cover altogether is something that a lot of players do, and when I've coached them and I try to talk to them about, hey, why are you doing this, or did you think about this, a lot of the times they're just like, oh, I wasn't even really considering that. Or maybe they know the cover was there, but in the moment they're just so tunnel visioned on the enemy that they don't end up utilizing it. So of course, if you have a ton of experience in first-person shooters or shooters in general, then you're probably more apt to lean towards the cover and seek it out and recognize it. But still, even for a lot of players that do have experience in other games, they will tunnel vision and they will swing wide and they won't think about their cover versus the angle that their enemy has, and they screw up here. This is a terrible habit. It's one of the most tangible habits you can try to nip in the bud early on in your experience, and you just have to lean into it more. You have to understand that, hey, if this guy is going to peek me from this angle, I have this pillar, this door, this high ground, whatever it may be at my disposal. I need to utilize it until I get them low enough where cover is really no longer of a factor for me. I just need to get to that enemy and finish this fight off. But cover is everything. You will never see good players not use it, and you will often see the best players utilize it really, really well and make the most of it. And as you progress in Apex, the way you use cover will evolve. It may start from just, hey, let me cover about 40 to 50% of my screen with this box or this door frame. But then it also may be, hey, when I go to weapon swap or go to reload, I'm naturally leaning back to the cover that I knew was on my left or my right or wherever it was, right? You utilize it in that lull of the fight where you have to weapon swap, you have to reload, you have to pop a shield cell, whatever it may be. So you have to know that this is something that you can use in and out and throughout your fight. And it's not just always about, hey, I got to use 50% and cover my screen here and start here and stay right here. It's sort of a dance that you want to just be in and around it. If you learn to do this, you'll have a leg up on a ton of your competition in Apex, trust me. Moving on to number 5. The next bad habit is not keeping up with the state of the game. Now, this is a little bit different than a tactical approach to the game, but knowledge is really power here, and you need to be aware of the weapon and legend meta changes season to season. This also could apply to how ranked plays differently in certain seasons too. Understanding the ranked meta of like, okay, this season it's more focused on kill points, whereas the last few seasons it was way more focused on just placement. Understanding how the game changes and evolves season to season is really vital to your improvement and to your success. Obviously, this season with the legend upgrades, they added a whole new dynamic to how legends feel, to how they play, and to how fights turn out. There's a lot more possibilities with different legends, and it's something that you want to be aware of. Now, at this point, a lot of players are probably pretty aware of all the legend upgrades and what they do, etc. But it's not just just for understanding the legend that you're playing.